The Hangout on air is live.
Oh, cool.
Okay, well, good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to WxLive webinar number 141. This is Uncle Pete's Corner. He's going to be discussing workarounds for XSD issues with the Authorizenet web service, Wizball. Okay, and without further ado, it's all yours, Uncle Pete.
All right. Good morning. So, as Tim mentioned, I was doing some work with the Authorizenet web service and ran into a few issues. We're going to show a way to work around those issues. Is kind of what we're doing today. We'll get into the specifics of it. Is this a bug? Is it not a bug? It's one of those gray areas that technically PCSoft is doing it right, everybody else is doing it wrong. But unfortunately, if everyone else is doing it wrong and you do it right, it leads to problems. So, you know, not necessarily a bug, but it sure can make life a little rough. So we'll get into the details of that, and I've made some suggestions to them on how they would change things to make it work a little better for us. We'll see if they take me up on what I suggested or not. So anyway, let's talk about some general just web service background information first. There's two flavors of web services. There's RESTful, R-E-S-T-ful, and then there's SOAP-based web services. RESTful services are the old school, everything is just HTTP post and gets to predefined URL endpoints. Anything that you do with the RESTful API, you depend on the documentation provided by the developer to know what those URLs are, what parameters to pass, what the result coming back to you is. So that's the basic of a RESTful API. Well, of course, you know, that wasn't good enough for the modern world, so they came up with SOAP-based APIs, which is basically a layer on top of XML that defined a standardized way of communicating with web services. And one of the parts of SOAP web services is you have a WSDL, W-S-D-L, which stands for Web Services Description Language. That is a document that defines what the methods of the web service are, what those parameters and their types are, what the results are. So it gives you basically, it's like importing a DLL into a Windows application, and now you have all those method calls and so forth of that DLL. It's a similar theory. Of course, you know, as we all know, the road to damnation is paved with good intentions, and SOAP and WSDLs fall right into that same category. To me, I've had more luck working with RESTful APIs than SOAP. Andy seems to like the SOAP one.
I like SOAP.
I think it all depends on who wrote the API more than anything else. What I've found is, generally speaking, and you know, there's exceptions on both sides of the case, but the SOAP-based ones always seem to have a few extra layers of abstraction. They just seem a little more complicated. The documentation generally isn't as good, and I think it's the nature of the beast. First, a lot of those SOAP-based APIs are developed in .NET, and the guys from the .NET world are just used to dealing with layers and layers of extraction, and that kind of bubbles into their interfaces. The other thing is they buy into this concept that the WSDL is their documentation. The WSDL gives me a list of methods, what their parameters are, and what the format of that parameter is. Does not tell me, you know, which parameters I do or don't need to pass and what that's going to do or not do.
I treat it as a treasure hunt.
Yeah, exactly. Now the RESTful guys, they're forced to write documentation because they don't have the WSDL. So it's like anything else. You know, SOAP can be done right, it can be done wrong. Just like OOP, you know, as we all remember in a previous lifetime, OOP done wrong can get very ugly. SOAP done wrong can get very ugly as well. Ask Andy about the PACE API sometime.
Yes, hence I love APIs.
Yeah. So it's like anything else. You know, there's good and bad to it. If you're going to be integrating web services, you're going to have to use both. You know, I'd say it's pretty much 50-50. About half of them out there are RESTful, half of them out there are SOAP-based. So you need to learn both methods. So, and what we're looking at today with the Authorizenet API is a SOAP-based API. So there's a little background on web services, and today's topic isn't specifically about using web services or even specifically using the Authorizenet. I'm not going to go into all the finer points of Authorizenet. I'm going to show you a specific issue and how to get around that issue. It's just a foundational block that, you know, you may be able to use with some other web service that you're dealing with. So the first step with using a web service, a SOAP-based web service, is the WSDL. You need to import that web service into your app. While we do that is we come over to the Project Explorer, right-click, use a web server service in this project. And I should have gotten that address into my clipboard first. All right, so we're going to use a web service. And then we just give it the address of that WSDL. Most SOAP-based APIs are going to give you an address like this. That's where the API lives, and the question mark WSDL tells it, return me the WSDL. It's basically just like a map from the old DLL days that defines all the methods and so forth. And we'll actually look at the code of this WSDL here shortly. Again, this is pretty much the standard way it's done. Like everything else, not everybody follows the standard. UPS does not publish their WSDL on the web. You actually have to download it as part of the SDK and then pull it off of the disk instead of pulling it from a website. The idea about pulling it from the website is when they update their WSDL, it's very easy for you to get that new update, and now you have whatever new features and functions and so forth they've published. Of course, that also means you get whatever new bugs and problems they've published. But
the other bad part about it is injection. Somebody rewrite their own deal into it and send you off to Never Never Land.
Right. So, you know, once again, good and bad. So we tell it that we're importing a web service. We gave it the address of the WSDL. My first knock against Authorizenet, it took me nearly an hour to find this URL address. The very first piece of any API, when you're looking to use an API, they should be giving you that address. Authorizenet hid it in a document 2 layers down in the documentation. Don't ask me. So now we've given it the address and we import it. This is just asking me to add it to my SCM. All right, once we've imported it, then we'll see it show up, and now it's just like any other procedure or component that we've added. We see methods, Within that method, we can see parameters and returns. So it's pretty much just like any other procedure. Now you see that Authorizenet, in their infinite wisdom, decided to call their web service service. I really don't need to go into how bad that is, right? You know, please, when you're writing web services, don't assume that you're the only service in town. So all of our calls to the web service start with service, because that's the name. And the one nice thing I will tell you about dealing with SOAP-based services is IntelliSense uses these services. And in fact, you see now that I no longer am getting compile errors in my code here. Like if we type service dot, I'm now seeing all those parameters and so forth. So that is one nice piece about using SOAP-based web services. All right, so now that we have the web service in our app, we'll get into the details of what my specific issue is. This code, again, I'm not going to get into every little detail of how the Authorize.net API works. We might do that in another webinar one day. But what this particular function that we're looking at the code for does is updates the payment information that I'm storing on Authorize.net's website. The reason that you want to do that, Authorize.net lets you store the information on their side and then gives you a token, which is this payment profile ID. That means that I can now charge this customer's credit card in the future for monthly subscriptions, whatever, but I'm not storing any of his credit card information on my side of the system, which means I'm not dealing with any PCI issues. Authorize.net is dealing with all that. So that's the nice thing about this is I'm not having to deal with PCI compliance. So the function that we're looking at here is updating that payment profile. For instance, let's say I need to change the billing address of that card so that it'll process the next time it's charged. Well, because we are dealing with PCI issues, some of that information that comes back from Authorize.net, once I've stored that credit card, I can no longer see that number. All I see is 4 X's, 00, and then the last 4 digits of the card. In this case, that's 0002. Now, where it led us to the whole issue with this is Authorize.net in their infinite wisdom also decided that the expiration date should be masked. So I can't even find out the expiration date of the card. It comes back as 4 X's, the most useful information in the world. The next problem is they've said that if you use one of these update methods, you have to send all of the information back. The information that changed gets changed. If the information is the same, it stays the same. The way most APIs do an update is you only pass in the fields that you're updating, and those get changed. Authorize.net, if I don't pass a field back in with the update, it's going to erase it on their side. So if I don't pass in the expiration date and the card number, they're going to get wiped out on the update. Issue is, as I said, I don't know the card number and expiration date. Well, what Authorize.net says in their documentation, which, by the way, their documentation is in beta. I told you that the guys for SOAP services think that they don't need to write documentation because they have a WSDL. How in the hell do you have beta documentation? So anyway, what the documentation says once you dig through it is if you're doing an update and the data is masked, if you pass the masked data back in, then it doesn't wipe it out and it won't update it. So since I don't know the expiration date, I can't pass the expiration date back in. It's coming to me as 4X's. I need to send it back as 4X's. And that's where we run into a problem. So let's run this. And as you see, all we're doing is we're defining our request, which if we come over to service and we look at update payment profile, we see that its parameter, we need to pass in a customer profile ID. Merchant authentication is how we let the API know who we are. That's one of the things that you're going to deal with SOAP is there's half a dozen different ways that they decide to do their authentication. The way that Authorizenet has done it is they want us to pass in an API key as part of the parameter to every function call. And then we pass in a payment profile. As you notice, these things are all structures, so there's fields within fields within fields. And that's what you're seeing over here is I've defined a request, which is an update customer payment profile type. And then I'm just doing a request.merchantauthentication.name, and I've got this stored globally because those are my API keys. Then I'm doing a request profile ID and giving it the profile ID on down the line. And as you see, I'm passing in the expiration date back as the 4X's. And in this case, all I'm trying to do is update billing address. Because if the customer has changed their billing address with the card and it doesn't get updated on Authorizenet side, the next time I try to process a payment, I'm going to get an AVS failure and not be able to process that payment. So I need to update that payment. But because of the way Authorizenet has decided to do it, I need to send all of this information back. So let's run this procedure. And this leads us to where our issue is. The value XXXX, which as you can see in the code is our expiration date. Can't actually see it. Let me scoot that off the screen where you can see it. XXXX does not respect the SSD diagram. Well, what the heck's it talking about? Well, what it's talking about is, as I said, SOAP is XML based. That Wizball is actually just an XML document that defines everything. XSD is that description of an XML that says this value has to be this type on down the line. It does some of that validation. And what it's telling us is that whatever this expiration date is defined as, the value XXXX is not a valid value for expiration date. But if we look at the documentation, that's exactly what Authorizenet tells us to send back. This is where I went into a tailspin, and before Andy says it, I gave Andy a call and he helped me figure this thing out. Could have done it on my own.
Yes, he could have.
So
but it's more fun when I get to help him.
Exactly. Anyway, the crazy thing is, and of course, one of the things that you're going to deal with anytime you're dealing with web services, any examples they publish are more than likely going to be PHP. Some others you'll get a .NET example and so forth. Rarely are you going to have a WINDEV WebDev example. And the crazy thing is the PHP example of this code works. They pass in XXXX and it works. Well, you know, that would lead you to believe that what we're dealing with here is some kind of bug with PCSoft. Well, what it is PHP does not enforce the XSD. It's much more lenient towards what happens. The problem with that is that because everyone just tests their web services with PHP, they've incorporated what could be considered a bug into their definition of their WSDL.
They get away with sloppy code.
Exactly, because it never fails on their side. They consider that their code works, but the reason it's not failing is because the way they're testing it isn't making sure that they're following their own rules. So, you know, all of that, you know, and this is one of the complaints I have against, you know, especially junior developers kind of get hung up at this point because it's all in the why it doesn't work and somebody should fix it. Well, you know, I'm paid to get a job done. You know, is this PCSoft's fault? Is it Authorizenet.net's fault? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I just need to get on with my job. So how can I make this work? Well, as I said, let's get a window over here. The WSDL is an XML file. So that's the URL that we just looked at, you know, that we incorporated, we pulled in the web service from. So as you see, it's an XML document. If we search this XML document for expiration date, we see right here, expiration date is defined as a G year month. And if we go on down, I'm sorry?
Can you make the text a bit bigger? Ah, thanks.
If we search, we see that there's three instances, and we see that the other two are defined as strings. But this instance right here is defined as a year month. That's what's causing our problem, is the field type expiration date is defined as a year month. PCSoft sees that and sees that we're trying to send an XXXX into year month. And it says, no, you can't do that. That's not a valid value for year and month.
Which is correct.
It's correct and gives us an error. Now, the beauty of all this is it's pretty easy workaround. So what we do is, because this is just an XML file, first thing we do is just right click, save it. We're going to save this off. We'll call it mod service, and then I like to go ahead and give it the extension of WSDL. All right, so we saved that over on temp, did I not? And if we open this with Notepad, we see there's our XML document. Now we can just search for expiration date. There's the definition, that's year month. If we search on down, there's a definition that's...
Zoom up your code.
There we go. All right, so now let's go back up to the top, search for that first one again, and we're just going to change this definition to a string. Obviously, as we know, Over on Authorizenet side, they're not following the rule. So they don't care what I send in the expiration date. They're not going to complain about it. In fact, they want me to send in 4X's. So all I need to do is make sure that PCSoft doesn't complain about those 4X's. So by changing this definition to a string, I've accomplished that. So now, save that file. Must have already saved it. All right. So now, we've made a change to that WSDL. How do we use that change? Well, what we do is we remove this web service that we pulled from the web. And now we use a web service. However, this time, instead of loading it from a web address, we're going to tell it that it's in a physical file. And if we go over to one that we just did, now the one thing that Andy and I both have experienced several times here is when you're dealing with web services and you reload them, sometimes you have to do it twice before you get the new one to show up. In this case, it's working pretty good for me because I'm switching from a web one to a file-based one. But if I were to go make another change to that file-based one and then pull it in again, sometimes I have to do that twice before I actually get the new one pulled in.
One of the suggestions to get around that is make sure that if you're in the SCM and is that you have your project checked out first. Then it may not make you do it twice.
That makes sense because it's keeping that information in the project file.
Right. And that's been a reported issue.
All right. So now if we come look at service and we look at update customer profile, well, not but payment profile, and we get down to payment, credit card. Now you'll see, and I should have shown you this before, now expiration date is just defined as a Unicode string. Yeah, it was working, hovering over it there for a second. There we go. Before it was showing as a year date. So now it's just defined as a string. Now if we run this procedure, we actually got down to success, and if we look at the result value, it actually worked. And we can actually look at the entire response structure from the web service. And we see that it's got a result code of OK. And there's no error messages or anything. So that's what's returned to us when it's successful. So
the world revolves again.
Exactly. What we did was lie to PCSoft and tell it that we're going to send it in as a string. Now, what has this done for us or against us, or however you want to look at it, is now that we've defined that as a string, now we can put in valid values and expiration date, which means everywhere else in our code where we're actually sending in the year, month parameter because they are changing their expiration date, it now falls on our responsibility to make sure that's in 4-digit year dash 2-digit month format, because the XSD is no longer enforcing that because we've told it that it's just a string. So now you can put XYZ in there and send it. It's not going to generate an error on our side. Now, of course, that's going to generate Authorizenet is going to complain because it's not a valid value on their side. But obviously they have some kind of exception code that's accepting that 4X's. So the only way for us to send those 4X's is to lie to PCSoft and say, hey, it's just an everyday ordinary string. How dangerous is this? Pretty dangerous. I mean, modifying the WSDL is not something that you should do lightly. Obviously, one of the issues that you're going to have is anytime they release a new WSDL,
you have to do it
version
again
of their API, you got to do it again. So you definitely want to document this very well, that you've modified the WSDL and how you've modified it. But again, it was my only way to make this work. I could have spent a month beating my head against PCSoft, beating my head against Authorizenet, trying to get one of them to make a change, but I needed to charge credit cards. So this was my solution to get it working. Now, we've talked about this topic right now in relation to web services, but Ben, when I was talking about this, mentioned that he's ran into similar issues just with XML in general. When he gets XML from .NET folks, a lot of times the XSD that comes with it doesn't follow the data that also comes with the XML file. So he's had to do similar things with just general XML files. For the most part, the XML I've dealt with generally doesn't come with an XSD, so I haven't dealt with it in a general XML standpoint. Andy, you've done a lot more XML work. Have you ran into this just with XML in general?
The only thing that I've ran into with a XSD type thing in bringing it in, there is an option there in the environment to actually import the XSD. I did this, and there are some new advanced types, or there's some types and stuff that they have out there now that won't import properly. So that just kind of shot that in the dirt right there. It no longer works. So that's been turned in. I believe they're addressing it right now. That was started in a while back.
The advantage of importing that XSD, which I can't remember, I think there's actually a piece in
there. There is. It's right there.
Yeah. Those of you that came to DevCon this year, part of my UPS demonstration, the World Ship program uses XML files to communicate with your program. UPS gives you an XSD for those files, and I did import that into my project. The nice thing about having that XSD in your project is, again, IntelliSense works. So you'll see in my UPS program, when I'm filling out that UPS XML file, I'm doing it like this format instead of actually having to hard code XML lines and so forth. I'm able to use IntelliSense and fill it out just like you would any other data structure in WINDEV WebDev.
And what I was importing, what I was importing is the XSD, and what it was dealing with is back in DEFCON we were doing the checkbook program to kind of show different things and how things worked, and I found a complete set of open APIs that would allow you to go get your checking information from your accounts from any bank out there that you might find. Problem is they have literally hundreds of functions that you can call, and I wasn't about to type them all in. So I tried to import the XSD and they failed. So I sent them all to PCSoft, and they're addressing them. If we get it working and everything starts working on it, I will put out the source code for it again and let everybody have a chance to see how to do that with the XSD diagram. We'll have a full webinar on it.
Great. All right. What I have made a suggestion, and it's been submitted to programming, whether or not it happens or not, is dealing with web services, you do have a few properties. And if we look at service ... see we have ignore error. You would think that that would be exactly what we need, but the only ignore errors we have relate to ignoring HTTP errors. What I've suggested to them is they need to add ignore XSD errors. That way, if we're dealing with a web service that came from a PHP world that isn't strictly following its own XSD, we could tell the service, hey, ignore the XSD errors, and that way we wouldn't be modifying the WSDL. So that's the suggestion I've made. I think that would probably be a pretty easy suggestion for them to do. It just comes down to where they fall on the whole, because as far as they're concerned, they're actually doing it right. And my argument is that's great and wonderful, you're doing it right, but I need to get my job done. And if Authorizenet is doing it wrong, you're doing it right. At the end of the day, all my client wants to do is use Authorizenet. So
now this is where Wireshark comes in also, because if you're not getting any error back at all, and you don't understand what didn't come back with the call to the WSDL, Wireshark, tool like Wireshark will tell you the error. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's and the other thing, and the way that I was able to verify that this actually even worked, is by using curl and the PHP examples. So I'm not saying go out and learn to be a PHP programmer, but you do need to learn how to use curl, which is just a way to pass URL commands from a DOS prompt, and PHP, because more than likely whatever API documentation you have, that's what the examples are going to be, is a combination of PHP and curl. So you need to be able to at least have that stuff configured on your machine and use it, because then you can issue those commands via curl and then use Wireshark to see what the response looks like coming back from the web service and going up to the web service. And a lot of times that'll give you a clue about how you need to work around that in your WINDEV WebDev program. So that's the topic. Like I said, maybe one day in the future we'll actually cover the entire Authorizenet API. I am slowly but surely building up quite a collection of these payment processing APIs. I've got Authorizenet, PayPal, and Swipe, which Swipe is by far my favorite one. First of all, they're much cheaper than the others, and I'm cheap. So I've been debating possibly releasing those as some type of a third-party product, but every time I think about that, I remind myself what being in the third-party product business was like back in the day, and I talked myself out of it. So, but if you are dealing with any of those, I definitely do offer consulting, and have a base code that can probably help you out. So give me a holler, and I can probably help you out one way or the other. And Andy gets my Authorizenet stuff, since he helped me get it working by saying, "Dumbass, just modify the WSDL." Hey, it was quicker than butting your head against the wall for a month.
Very true. Very true. So, any questions?
Some of the simplest things are the easiest to do.
Well, I had to do it early on, back in version 18 of WINDEV. Not all the items were supported by WINDEV from a WSDL, and the PACE API had a set of functions that caused, you know, that you could run processes over there on pace with. And there was about 6 of them that it would flat just complain about. It would not allow me to import the WSDL. So I cheated and thought, what the heck, and I just deleted them out of the WSDL and then imported it locally, and it worked. So that's the reason why I say just modify the WSDL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That explains maybe what the issue I got, because I wanted to play around with Amazon stuff, and I just pulled it in, but I didn't have much time, and I just didn't get it working, so I just left it. But I'm going to go back and look at it. Most probably a similar thing.
Yeah, Andy definitely, good or bad, has gotten a lot of experience dealing with that paste API, because if there's ever an example of how not to do an API, paste would definitely be it.
Well, it's done overseas in a land that has millions of people that all study computers and work out of places where they have bicycles to generate electricity. So, what do you think?
Yeah, it proves my point on SOAP-based services being difficult. Now, one last thing, and we're obviously not going to cover any of the details today, but Andy's original suggestion to me was a scorched earth method. You do have available to you when you're dealing with SOAP services is, if you cannot get the WSDL to work, you are able to make direct SOAP calls.
That's correct.
That is a scorched earth method I will let Andy do a webinar on.
He wasn't too happy about having to do a complete SOAP call.
Yeah. My suggestion is, if you have to resort to making direct SOAP calls, find a different web service.
Hey, Pete, we have a question.
I would think so too.
We have a question, Pete.
Okay.
It's from Jeff Graham, and it says, can you comment on the pros and cons of using Authorize.net versus PayPal and others?
Well, Authorize.net is a true merchant gateway, so that's the first piece of it. I actually wrote this for Alan, and Alan's company, because they're processing utility billing, they run a lot of transactions through. The difference in the rates that they can get from Authorize.net and a true merchant account versus, you know, PayPal is a considerable amount of money. So that's the first thing. Authorize.net is a very involved system. I can do e-checks through it. I mean, it's very elaborate. Now, I will tell you.
Does Authorize.net do reoccurring or not?
They do, and that's the reason I'm storing all the payment profiles and so forth, is because I can just ding those profiles and do reoccurring. So does PayPal. Now,
yeah, PayPal I knew did that.
To do that with PayPal, you have to be on the advanced.
Yeah.
The one that you're paying $34.95 a month for. So with just processing payments, you can do that on the one that you're not paying any kind of monthly fee. Now, the one that I am using for my own personal business, PC reminder, things like that, is Swipe. Swipe is kind of, it's closer to PayPal, but it also has all this ability to do reoccurring models and all those.
I've also come to like Swipe.
I'm sorry?
I've also come to like Swipe.
Okay, you're working with Swipe? Yeah, yeah. Swipe. The nice thing about Swipe, and the reason I looked at it versus PayPal, is I don't have to pay $34.95 to use Swipe with my reoccurring stuff.
Yeah.
But
and the pricing is not bad either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In fact, their pricing is identical to PayPal as far as
without the recurring
go.
Yeah, without the recurring extra fee.
Exactly, without the monthly fees. The per transaction fees are the same.
Yeah.
I've been talking to them. What I'd like to see them do is offer a micropayment because like PC Reminder is $34.95 a month or a year. I'd love to be able to do that on a monthly deal.
Allow it, yeah, because otherwise the base price plus of what's it, 2.5%, it becomes quite a bit of the chunk of
exactly. Yeah, the 30 cents per transaction eats you up on micropayments. And some of the other services have come up with a different pricing for micropayments. I got a feeling it just matters on what your volume is whether or not that works. But yeah, if you're doing big volume, you already have a merchant account, those type of things, Authorize.net is where you want to go. The others are kind of a combination API and merchant account. Authorize.net, you already have to have a merchant account. They are not a merchant account.
Yeah, the dealing with merchant accounts years ago when we were doing merchant account software for our previous lifespan, Swipe and the other one, PayPal. Yeah, you don't need to have a merchant account to run credit cards through.
Yeah.
They basically are your pseudo merchant account. Everybody else required a merchant account to go through, and when you go through a merchant account, you literally go through a credit bureau and the whole 9 yards. You're getting a credit line.
Yeah, and the other thing is also you have to guarantee also a certain percentage of the turnover you want to take every month. So if you're taking $50,000, for example, a month, you have to kind of guarantee at least 10,000, and you have to have it fixed somewhere that's untouchable.
Well, they must have started that lately. I mean, when I was writing the software for CW, there was not a guaranteed amount to flow through. Now, there was guaranteed amounts to get the rates that you wanted. Otherwise, it could go higher. You could jump a couple.
The higher turnover, the lower the costs would go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So if you didn't keep this minimum amount, you couldn't get the lower rates. It would jump higher automatically. But there wasn't like you would lose it or something like that. No.
I don't say you lose it. To get a merchant account, you have to put in guarantees for the type of turnover.
A lot of that depends on your company's credit rating and how long it's been in business, and also what business you're in.
Yeah.
Because when you're dealing with merchant accounts, they're going to rate it based on the risk of the business.
Certain transactions have a higher return.
Right.
Yeah. And they really don't like gambling or porn.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would say is, if this is a startup, a side project, those kind of things, I would look at PayPal or Swipe. If it's a brick and mortar business that you're adding on web sales or something, and you already have a merchant account, Authorize.net may be a better option for you. You just need to explore what the costs are going to be versus what the others are, because more than likely you're going to get a better rate because you're using your existing merchant account. But do understand, Authorize.net is not doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. They are going to charge you on top of what your merchant rates are charging you. But PayPal and Swipe, and there's others out there, but those are the two that I've used, and I think one or the other pretty well solves whatever issue you need. They are charging a higher rate, but
it's all inclusive.
Yeah, exactly. And with Swipe, I filled out I signed up and was processing cards 2 hours later.
Yeah.
Trying to set up a merchant account, you're looking at a minimum of a couple of weeks.
Yeah. But also with Swipe, you start with a lower amount, and when you get to a certain point, then they expect you to identify yourself, or what do you want to call it, a little bit more. So they will go into your background and then cross-check your phone numbers, cross-check your business name, and etc. So when you have low turnover, you can get away with, like you say, 2 hours later you're processing. But
Right.
when you going into the thousands, they start going a little bit more into your background and expecting certain identification material submitted for your company and yourself, and then they'll raise the bar.
Right. Yeah,
So
and that's
it's
the
a lot
nice
easier.
thing, you know, because I've got a few different websites that, you know, I'm doing. None of them are high volume at this point. You know, they're all startup experimental things. You know, that they're making a few $100 a month kind of things. You know, and I'd like to be able to charge under the individual websites' names and so forth.
Yeah,
that's where
sense.
Swipe or PayPal makes that so much easier.
Yeah, makes sense, because if the client identifies, and that's where that little, 10 characters, whatever you put in as a reference to your end user, makes a difference. Because if I don't see it and I don't understand where it's coming from, I'll most probably like to refute it quicker and say, oh no, this is my PC remind. That's fine, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what used to happen to me under my old PC reminder site.
Yeah.
Was because
you couldn't
everything
do that.
was coming in as just being PayPal, because PayPal payments do come in as PayPal, and then they would come in under PayPal asterisk next stage or something. I wasn't able to get them to say PC reminder. Where now the folks don't know anything about Swipe. You know, they come in as PC reminder.
Yeah. That's why I like Swipe. They were one of the first ones I remember allowing you to have multiple sites with different names.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely one that I recommend. I'm really liking it now. When you get into the subscription model and so forth, it gets a little more complex, but that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
Any other questions, Tim?
Nothing out here. I just have one little question about Swipe. What's the website for Swipe?
Swipe.
SWYPE.
Is it
SWYPE.
SWYPE, okay. Yeah, I was just want to make sure.
He is from Kentucky, you know. We have to help it.
SWIPE, SWYPE, and
YPE.
Oh. SWYPE. Okay. Yeah, no other questions, guys. All right.
Actually, all right. SWIP, yeah. SWIPE is some kind of web design company.
Okay. Anything else, guys? Well, thanks everybody once again, and
thanks.
This is great.
We should have another high-quality presentation next Friday. I don't know who it's going to be yet, but we'll announce it on the.
I know what it's going to be.
It's going to be you?
I know what it's going to be.
What's it
I swear I do.
What?
We're going to go through. We're going to start a weekly or bi-weekly deal of each step at a time, going through basics classes all the way up to advanced classes and using them in your application.
Excellent.
Excellent. So we're going to watch the advantages, why you should be using them, and can you use them with both Hyperfile as well as SQL, as well as whatever you want to use them with.
Okay, excellent, guys.
Tim, actually, it's not Swipe, it's Stripe. I always screw that up.
So the Kentucky guy didn't know what he was saying.
Oh, man.
Stripe. STRIPE, Stripe.
Pete was
referring
leading
to
us
the
astray.
stripe on the back of your credit card.
Yeah, Pete was leading us astray.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I asked the question. Anything else, guys?
All I can say is y'all be good or be good at it.